6.4 Are markets efficient? Economists are concerned about efficiency of markets and ensuring that resources are allocated efficiently. Allocative efficiency occurs when the value consumers put on the good or service equal the cost of producing the product or service. In other words, when marginal benefit, that is, the price, equals marginal cost. Productive efficiency occurs when output is achieved at the minimum average cost. That means the output is prepared with the least cost. Efficient market, that is, marginal benefit equals marginal cost. A competitive market that is operating at equilibrium is an efficient market because a competitive equilibrium allocates resources to the activities that create the highest or the greatest possible value, or resources are used to produce the quantity of goods and services that people value most highly. The economy is getting as much benefit as possible from its scarce resources, and all the possible gains from trade have been achieved. In other words, the optimal amount of each good and service is being produced and consumed. One of the important features of the market where the equilibrium is efficient is where demand curve and supply curve intersect. That is, marginal benefit equals marginal cost. The demand curve tells us the marginal benefit from pizza. The supply curve tells us the marginal cost of pizza. The total surplus is maximized. Another way of checking that the equilibrium is efficient is to look at the total surplus it generates. Total surplus is the sum of producer surplus and consumer surplus. A price higher than the market price will lead to a surplus. Increases producer surplus but decreases consumer surplus because the price is higher than what many consumers are willing to pay. And if the price is below the market price, then shortages will be created, increases consumer surplus but decreases producer surplus because at lower prices, producers are willing to produce a quantity that is less than demand. So in actuality, shortages and surpluses will reduce the total surplus. Therefore, total surplus is maximized when the price equals the market equilibrium. You can see this in the picture. In competitive markets, only the most efficient producers will be able to produce a product for less than the market price. Hence, only those sellers will produce a product. That is, what results in the most efficient allocation of economic resources. Looking at the graph, it can be easily seen that as long as the product price is below the market equilibrium price, increasing the quantity of the product increases total surplus. Once the price rises above the market equilibrium price, then total surplus either starts to decline or no longer increases. Hence, total surplus is maximized at the market equilibrium price. That is why competitive free markets allocate resources most efficiently than centrally planned economies. The invisible hand. In a free market, buyers and sellers each attempt to do the best they can for themselves. Buyers seek the lowest possible price and sellers seek the highest possible price. They pursue their self-interest. But in pursuit of self-interest, according to Adam Smith, unknowingly they also serve the social interest. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, written in 1776, suggested that competitive markets send resources to the uses in which they have the highest value. Smith believed that each participant in a competitive market is led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Market failure. A market is efficient when it provides the most consumer surplus and the most producer surplus possible. An inefficient market creates what economists call a deadweight loss. The decrease in consumer surplus and producer surplus that results from an inefficient level of production. A deadweight loss is a loss in economic efficiency as a result of disequilibrium of supply and demand. In other words, goods and services are either being under or oversupplied to the market, leading to an economic loss to the nation. The deadweight loss is borne by the entire society. It is a social loss. When goods are undersupplied, the economic loss is as a result of demand going unfulfilled. If we take the baker example again, the baker makes 100 loaves of bread and sells them all. However, there are 20 customers who still want bread. This is deadweight loss because a consumer is willing and able to make an economic exchange but is prevented from doing so because there is no supply. In the long run, prices will rise due to shortage of supply. When a product is overvalued, the firm that produces it may initially gain higher profits. But in the case of elastic goods, those for which demand changes based on price, consumers are likely to reduce their spending when these goods are overvalued. This will significantly diminish profits. When goods are oversupplied, there is an economic loss. For example, a baker may make 100 loaves of bread but only sells 80. The remaining 20 remaining loaves will go dry and moldy and will have to be thrown away, resulting in a deadweight loss. In the long run, when products are undervalued or prices of goods drop due to oversupply, firms do not make enough to justify the cost of production, so they will be less motivated to produce these goods and services. Typically, then firms will raise the price of the product, stop producing and selling the products, or go out of business due to lack of profits. In the long term, businesses eliminate deadweight loss by altering prices to attract consumers. If prices are too low, firms will lose money and go out of business. If prices are too high, consumers will turn away and go elsewhere. Over time, this fluctuates as firms go out of business or reduce prices in a constant fight to find the equilibrium point. However, this only works when there is sufficient competition in the marketplace, whereby firms use price mechanisms to compete. Deadweight loss is usually as a result of government interventions such as price floors, price ceilings, taxation, and subsidy, which creates a shift in the supply and demand curve, thereby pushing it out of its natural equilibrium. Deadweight losses can also be created by artificial barriers to competition, such as occupational licensing requirements, or from the artificial restriction of supply by monopolists or oligopolists. An example of deadweight loss caused by underproduction. You can calculate deadweight loss by finding the area shaded in the figure in gray. In this example, it refers to a tax that has been levied, which in turn pushed up the price of the good and shifted the supply curve to the left. This is the case of underproduction. Therefore, fewer consumers are purchasing the product at a higher price, thereby reducing the consumer surplus. At the same time, this results in lower profits for producers, which forces them to reduce production and pushes them out of business. In the picture, you can see that initially the market is cleared or is at equilibrium at point E1 with the P1 $5 and the quantity Q1 200. Because P1 and Q1 are efficient, total welfare, which is equal to consumer surplus plus producer surplus, is maximized, which is called allocative efficiency. When a market transaction is taxed, that is after tax, the buyer pays a higher price from P1 $5 to P2 $7, and the seller receives a lower price at P3 at $3. This lowers demand, which shifts the buyer's equilibrium from the market price P1 to a higher price P2 at lower quantities. Likewise, because the seller receives a lower price P3 for his product, less of it is supplied, which moves the seller's equilibrium down the supply curve to a lower price and quantity. The formula to calculate deadweight loss for the consumer surplus and producer surplus is half times Q1 minus Q2 times P2 minus P1. And the producer surplus equals half times Q1 minus Q2, that is change in quantity, times change in price, that is P1 minus P3. In this case, the deadweight consumer surplus would equal half times 7 minus 5 times 200 minus 100 is equal to 100. The deadweight loss of producer surplus would equal half times 5 minus 3 times 200 minus 100 is equal to 100. So in total, the deadweight loss to society is $200 for this example. To calculate deadweight loss, we must find the area highlighted in gray below which refers to both the deadweight loss to the consumer and the producer. The reason for this shift is because fewer consumers are purchasing the product at a higher price, thereby reducing the consumer surplus. At the same time, this results in lower profits for producers, which forces them to reduce production and pushes some out of business. Because these buyers and sellers do not participate in the market, they do not contribute to the tax, which is why government does not receive the portion consisting of the deadweight loss. Thus, in terms of total surplus, the deadweight loss equals the reduction in total surplus minus the total revenue collected by the government. Deadweight loss is equal to loss of total surplus minus total revenue. An example of deadweight loss caused by overproduction due to subsidies. A subsidy is a form of incentive or financial aid given by the government to an economic sector with the objective of enhancing social and economic well-being. Subsidy payments will lead to larger production and supply of goods in the market, causing excess supply. Also, the consumers are willing to pay less on a subsidized product, which is even lower than the marginal cost of producing or manufacturing, causing the deadweight loss in the market. Initially, the market is at equilibrium at $5 price and 6,000 pence. The consumers would start to buy at $9 price. Above it, demand would be 0. And starting price that sellers would sell is $1, below it supply is 0. Total welfare is maximized at equilibrium and allocative efficiency is achieved. If there is quantity and price other than equilibrium, then there will be a loss of consumer and producer surplus, which is called deadweight loss. Let's assume that there is a rise in price of pens from $5 to $7. Then at higher price, sellers will increase their production to 9,000 pens. Higher price also means that consumers are now willing to buy less quantity of pens than before. Now demand for pens will reduce to 3,000. This is an inefficient quantity of price and quantity because quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. There is a surplus of excess pens, or too much pens are being produced. At 9,000 pens, marginal cost is greater than marginal benefit. Cost of the society is greater than the consumer are willing to pay. Now we can calculate the over allocation of pens on total welfare of consumer and producer. The figure shows the consumer surplus after the excess supply of pens and also the producer surplus. The portion shows the pens that are not sold, therefore not included in the area of PS or producer surplus. Total welfare is equal to 3,000, that is consumer surplus, plus 15,000, that is producer surplus, is equal to 18,000. Some producers are better off because the higher prices, but since some pens are unsold, not all producers will be able to sell the pens at higher prices. Deadweight loss or welfare loss equals 24,000 minus 18,000 is equal to 6,000 pens. Remain unsold in the market. It means this market is inefficient by 6,000 pens because of higher price. Sources of market failure or deadweight loss. Price controls such as price ceiling and price floors. These distort the incentives of supply and demand, leading to level of production different from those of an unregulated market. Rent control and the minimum wage are examples of price ceiling and price floor. Taxes and trade restrictions such as subsidies and quotas. Taxes increase the price that buyers pay and decrease the amount that sellers receive. Taxes decrease the quantity produced and lead to underproduction. Subsidies are government payments to producers that effectively increase the amount sellers receive and decrease the price buyers pay, leading to production of more than the efficient quantity of the good or overproduction. Monopoly is a firm that is the sole provider of a good or service. Local water supply and cable television are supplied by firms that are monopolies. Because monopoly has no competitors and their self-interest is to make profit, a monopoly restricts supply or produces too little and charges too high a price, which leads to underproduction. Another source of deadweight loss is public goods and common resources. Public goods are goods and services that are consumed by people regardless of whether or not they paid for them. National defense is a public good. If others choose to pay to protect a country from outside attack, all the residents of the country enjoy such protection whether they have paid for their share of it or not. Competitive markets will produce less than the efficient quantity of public goods, or there is underproduction because it is in everyone's self-interest to avoid paying for a public good. This is often referred to as the free rider problem. A common resource is one which all may use. For example, if a common resource is an unrestricted ocean fishery, each fisherman will fish in the ocean at no cost and will have little incentives to maintain and improve the resource. Since individuals do not have the incentive to fish at the economically efficient level, overfishing is the result. Left to competitive market forces, common resources are generally overused and production of related goods and services is greater than the efficient amount. Externalities. An externality is a cost or benefit that affects someone other than the seller and buyer of a good. An example of an external cost is the cost imposed on fishermen by a firm that pollutes the ocean as part of its production process. The firm does not necessarily consider the resulting decrease in the fish population as part of its cost of production, even though this cost is borne by the fishing industry and society. In this case, the output quantity of the polluting firm is greater than the efficient quantity. The societal cost greater than the direct cost of production the producer bears. The result is an over-allocation of resources to production by the polluting firm. An example of an external benefit is the development of a tropical garden on the grounds of an industrial complex that is located along a busy thoroughfare. The developer of the grounds only considers the marginal benefit to the firms within the complex when deciding whether to take on the grounds in influence, not the benefit received by the travelers who take pleasure in the view of the garden. External benefits result in demand curves that do not represent the societal benefit of the good or service, so that the equilibrium quantity produced until consumed is less than the efficient quantity. High transaction cost. Opportunity cost of making trades in a market is called transaction costs. Some markets are just too costly to operate. Before a particular mutually beneficial trade can take place, at least one party must figure out that there may be someone with which such a trade is potentially possible. Search out one or more such possible trade partners, inform him or them of the opportunity, and negotiate the terms of the exchange. All of these activities involve opportunity cost in terms of time, energy, and money. After a trade has been agreed upon, there may also be significant cost involved in monitoring or policing the other party to make sure he is honored the terms of the agreement, and or if he is not, to take appropriate legal or other actions to make him do so. These are the main sort of transaction costs. Chapter review. Consumer surplus. The difference between the maximum price consumers are willing to pay for a product and the actual price. The surplus, measured in dollar terms, reflects the extra utility gained from paying a lower price than what is required to obtain the good, which is called marginal benefit. Consumer surplus is equal to maximum willingness to pay, that is, consumer's marginal benefit for the good measured in dollar terms, minus the actual price, that is, the equilibrium or market price. Our consumer surplus is shown graphically as the area under the demand curve and above the equilibrium price. Consumer surplus and price are inversely related. All else equal, a higher price reduces consumer surplus. Producer surplus, the difference between the actual price producers receive and the minimum acceptable price. Producer surplus is equal to minimum acceptable price minus actual price for each unit sold. Producer surplus is shown graphically as the area above the supply curve and below the equilibrium price. Producer surplus and price are directly related. All else equal, a higher price increases producer surplus. Efficiency. Markets are allocatively efficient, that is, allocation of resources to the quantity most desired, when consumer and producer surplus are at a maximum. Consumers receive utility up to their maximum willingness to pay but only have to pay the equilibrium price. Producers receive the equilibrium price for each unit, but it only costs the minimum acceptable price to produce. Allocative efficiency occurs at quantity levels where three conditions exist. MB is equal to MC. Maximum willingness to pay is equal to minimum acceptable price. Combined consumer and producer surplus is at a maximum. Maximum benefit to society occurs when price and quantity are at the equilibrium point. Inefficiency and deadweight loss. Underproduction reduces both consumer and producer surplus, and efficiency is lost because both buyers and sellers would be willing to exchange a higher quantity. Overproduction causes inefficiency because past the equilibrium quantity, it costs society more to produce the good than it is worth to the consumer in terms of willingness to pay. A deadweight loss occurs when the combined consumer and producer surplus is not maximized. This occurs when something such as the price control causes either overproduction or underproduction of good or service.